Yes,
Sounds good.
and you are live, Mayor Rumbaud.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight. I will call this meeting to order, and we will just kind of go around. We have our council and staff here tonight, but we'd like to welcome Mary Lou Tanner and John Hendricks, who are helping us with our official plan, as well as Philip Ruff and Ken Mellinson from the county, who are our diligent planners. So thank you guys for coming. And I'm just going to go through the explanation of the purpose of this meeting. As part of the process to update the Township of Warwick official plan, the township is holding the statutory public meeting under the Planning Act to hear from residents and council on proposed official plan which is available to review on the township website. A decision about proposed official plan will not be made by council at this public meeting. The purpose of the public meeting is to hear the feedback and provide a public forum for discussion of the official plan update. In order to be eligible to appeal the eventual decision of the Township of Warwick Council to the local planning appeal tribunal, a person or public body must make an oral submission at a public meeting or make a written submission to the Township of Warwick before a decision is made. If one does make an oral or written submission at a public meeting, they can be added as a party to the hearing of an appeal before the tribunal. Please also note that the open house, as required by the Planning Act, was held on April 20th, 2021. A slideshow outlining many of the key changes proposed was presented at this open house and can be reviewed from the April 20th meeting agenda, which is online. I'm going to ask our clerk for confirmation of the notice process.
Thanks, Mayor Rumbaud. So notice of this meeting was provided on April 1st on our municipal website, on our social media, and following that was also placed for 2 consecutive weeks in both of our local newspapers. Thank you.
Move on to 6A. The Township of Warwick's consultants, Niagara Planning Group, will provide an update regarding the status of the main questions, comments, and concerns brought forth by the public as part of the official plan review process thus far. So I'm going to turn it over to Mary Lou, I believe. All right.
Thanks very much, Mayor Rombout. If Ria could load the presentation. So good evening. Also joining us from our firm is Ria Davis, who's been the planner who's worked with John and I on this update. So we can go to the next slide, please. So I want to give you an overview of the public engagement that we've taken since we started working on this project last year. And this presentation will not be a repeat of last week's presentation. As the mayor said, it is available on the township's website under last week's agenda. But I do want to highlight the important engagement process that we've undertaken and also where we are going with the engagement on the official plan update. We began last fall with the special meeting with council and residents that was held in person in September of last year. And that's a requirement of the Planning Act. So we can hear from residents about their concerns and their issues. We also conducted an online survey to gauge feedback on issues that had been identified by council and the community at that meeting, as well as issues that we wanted to hear from the community on related to housing and also related to jobs and public spaces and a number of other issues. We took all of that feedback and the research that we did, and in January of this year, we released a background report that summarized everything that we've heard. Since that time, and actually since late last year, we've been working on proposed updates to the official plan. And that is the proposed update that we gave the presentation on last week and that we're going to hear feedback on tonight. And it is available on the township's website. We provided council with an update in March to give council an overview of the content. We also, at the end of March and into early April, issued the request for agency comments so that the statutory agencies, which are people like the Conservation Authority, the school boards, your neighboring municipalities, as well as Ontario Power Generation and Hydro One, for examples. They are required to see the plan and to provide comments. We anticipate getting their comments in the next few weeks, and we'll be preparing a summary of those comments for council, which we will be releasing in May. At the same time, in April of this year, we've held the open house, as the mayor indicated, as well as tonight's statutory public meeting. And everything we've heard last week and we'll hear tonight, we're making detailed notes on so that we can provide a community response document where we respond to the feedback we've received from the community. In June of this year, we'll be back with council to share with you what we've heard in terms of the agency feedback and the public feedback and the changes that we're proposing in terms of the update and how we've responded to that feedback. And finally, in July of this year, we anticipate we'll be bringing forward a final version of the official plan for council to adopt. Next slide, please. It's important that we understand what an official plan does for the community. And I think it's also important to understand that Warwick has a very strong foundation for their official plan. The official plan update really confirms the strength of the community in terms of the current official plan, but a number of key documents that the township and township council have done. And those all were part and parcel of the update that we prepared. Council has also decided to use the provisions of the provincial policy statement to plan for growth to 2046. And this means planning for a 25-year future and addressing how and where the township is going to grow. And this update also implements growth for both jobs and housing, and making sure that the township has the tools to be attractive for jobs and employers to grow the economy in the township, but also ensure that there's provisions for new housing and new opportunities for housing growth. And we saw last week the importance of housing growth in particular, as the township has exceeded the forecasted population that was identified by Lambton County for the township. So there's some work to do with the county on that, but it does indicate a growing community. Next slide, please. Some of the things that we heard last week and continue to hear about, there's still some questions about surplus farm dwelling severances. This is a circumstance that arises when one farmer buys a second farm and both farms have houses and the farmer only needs one house. It is an opportunity for the township, and it is something that takes some care and consideration, but it is also supportive of the agricultural community in terms of managing the housing stock and retaining housing stock in the agricultural area. There continues to be some questions about cannabis growing that we'll be responding to next month, and also some questions about where growth will occur. And we look forward to the conversations this evening about these issues and whatever else people have questions about. Next slide, please. We do want to hear from you. So the township has created a dedicated email account. It's officialplan@warwicktownship.ca. Amanda is monitoring that and sharing feedback that comes into it. And we will be responding to every email that we get, as well as the feedback that we hear tonight. So with that, we'll take the presentation down and we can now start to hear from council and the community. Thanks, Ria.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary Lou. Council, there is a motion that the information regarding the official plan review presented by NPG Solutions be received, and that the correspondence, presentations, and submissions from other agencies in the public at the public meeting be received. We do need a motion and a seconder, moved by Councillor Mitchell, seconded by Councillor Morris. All in favor? That is carried. So we are going to move on to the questions or comments from the members of the public portion of the meeting. So do we have some members of the public, Amanda, that would like to speak tonight?
So Mayor Ramos, and this is just an open forum, so we don't have anyone who made it known in advance that they would like to speak, but anyone from the public present on the meeting that wishes to do so is welcome to do so and be recognized by you.
Okay, so I invite anybody who's on the call. I don't see anybody outside of our group here. So please, if you could turn your mic on and your camera on so that we could possibly see you or speak up. Not a lot of, oh, here we go. How are you? Mr. Calipari, would you like to speak to anything tonight?
Not yet.
Not
I don't
yet.
have any questions yet. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Are there any questions from any members of council? Councillor Morris.
Mary Lou, you're still looking into the 402 and CN property, whether it be an exemption because they've taken the property off the original farms?
We are, Councillor Mitchell. We don't have an answer for you, but we will provide you an answer in the response document in May.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No, everybody's quite quiet tonight. Councillor Westgate.
I did have an inquiry about, there's a farm that's 90% inside the circle around Watford. And they would like to divide that. Because it's in the circle, is there anything we could do?
It depends where it is in the circle. So Councillor Westgate, I'm wondering if perhaps you and I could have an offline conversation and I can get the address and we can take a look at it. But I will tell you that if it's agriculture or restricted agriculture, the only option for severances in Ontario is through a surplus farm dwelling severance. Ontario restricted and removed the ability to have farm severances many, many years ago.
And I lied, it's only about a third inside.
Okay. Well, if you want to get in touch with me and give me the address, we can take a look at it for you.
Would a creek running through it, is that kind of a natural severance, or we don't look at that anymore either, do we?
No, not anymore.
Any other questions or comments? Frank?
So the in the southeast of the town, there's that big yellow block of residential alongside of the tracks. I would like to have that moved up to the northwest side of town. What is the process for that, I guess? And how do we make sure that gets moved accordingly?
So we are aware that that's an issue for the township. The process for doing that is it requires a County of Lambton official plan amendment first. There are provisions in Ontario to do what's called a land swap. So if it's, and this is just a number I'm picking, if it's 40 acres in the northwest to be added, then 40 acres in the southeast has to come out. There are certain requirements that also need to be met about studies, but in essence, that's how it's done. So it starts at Lambton County, and then the township would pass a similar amendment, and they could be passed pretty much at the same time once the studies are done and the county has adopted their official plan amendment.
What is the time frame? How long does that take generally?
So I've done exactly one. It's also the only one in Ontario that's been done.
Oh.
And that one, but I will say that that one took a while, but it was to resolve an appeal. So this is a different circumstance where it would more than likely be voluntary on everyone's part. An agricultural impact study needs to be done. There's an aggregate study that needs to be done, but that won't be an issue because there's no resources in the particular area that's being looked at to include. So, I would say it could be done in months because we know the nature and extent of the work that needs to be done. And then the county would need to pass the official plan amendment. The province of Ontario needs to approve that official plan amendment once the county passes it. So that would probably take a bit of time as well beyond the months that I described.
So is this something that the official plan that you guys are doing now would drive, or is it something I have to drive?
Following this, the public portion of this meeting, council and staff are going to be deliberating on that topic, I believe, are we not?
Yes.
So we're going to be going over what we see as a good fit for the community, and that they'll take that information and go to the county with it. Is that correct, Mary Lou?
Yeah, and we'll have some discussion about process and next steps around that. So yeah, that's the next part of this meeting.
Okay.
But that's following the public portion. It will still be online, but it won't be a big public
Okay.
meeting.
So how do I know when there's decisions being made on this? Like, am I notified, obviously, in email, or am I brought into meetings?
I think that right now the best solution is we need to get through this evening's meeting. I'd suggest that you put your request and your concerns in writing as part of this process. And then it will go into the response document we prepare next month. And also you'll be able to track how the issue is being addressed. And because it's such a significant issue for council, as we come back in June, we'll likely have another conversation about it. And even probably as part of the adoption of the official plan as well.
Okay.
We're all learning as part of this process, it sounds like, so.
Can you, sorry, one more question. Can you move it and then move it again, or a portion of it again? I think I asked that.
You can.
Or is that just?
Well, you can, but it's a county official plan amendment,
Okay.
and the studies need to be done. And it's really the agricultural impact assessment.
Okay.
There might be a creek in the northwest. I can't remember offhand. So probably a little bit of natural heritage work, but it's in these circumstances, it's largely the agricultural impact.
Okay. And then just from a township standpoint, is the entire 40 acres being moved? Or is it what I want to request?
It's up to council to decide how much gets swapped.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
And I would just chime in for a second and just add that the more that you break the total pieces up, so if you are moving, say, 40 acres, the more you break it up into little pieces and scatter it around, the higher the cost of the studies, because you're going to have more areas that are going to need study work done. So ideally what you want to try to do is keep it in one chunk, or two would be my suggestion, to kind of reduce the impact of any study costs. Because if you're breaking it up into 10, chances are you're going to need 10 different studies. And that's not just 10 different agricultural studies, that's 10 different aggregate studies, 10 different, think of it 10 times each thing that you need to do.
Good to
So
know.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Frank.
The cost for those studies is the developers on the developer, or what?
It depends who leads the process. So if you, as a property owner, applied for a county official plan amendment to do a swap, you would need to pay for the studies. If the county initiates it, or the township and county initiate it together, they would likely be through the public sector funds.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Westgate, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, since we've used up a fair amount of our residential land since the last time we did the official plan, can we just add more residential area?
No, you cannot. The boundaries for where growth will occur are set by Lambton County, and those were set in the Lambton County official plan in 2017.
Ken, did you want to remind council of when the process for the county official plan began? Because I thought that was interesting.
You were reading my mind and I was just about to jump in there. So firstly, get out of my mind. And secondly, the process started in 2010. So that was when the official plan started. So if you think back to then, I don't think there was any concept of growth in a lot of the local municipalities at that point. So you guys have certainly turned a corner.
Yes, and 10 years is a long time to be working on something. So I don't think the county is going to be too eager to be readdressing it anytime within the next, I would say, at least 5 years.
Well, and I'm also hoping that if we do a county official plan amendment, it doesn't take that long.
Right. And so there is possibilities for amendments though, right, Ken?
Correct. So the municipality, so depending on which plan you look at, I'll speak to the county plan and then I'll speak to yours. But essentially, the municipality that owns the plan can amend the plan at any time. Back to Councillor Westgate's comment though, your plan can't drive a change per se to the county. It's the other way around. So in terms of your question about, well, can we add additional land? I always look at the county official plan amendment process in a series of sort of different levels. So you could have a county official plan amendment that is a simple text amendment. So something was missed or we're trying to enable something and we just need to add some text to the bylaw. So that's kind of a low level amendment. The second level to me is getting into the settlement boundary discussion, and it's the swap that Mary Lou has been talking about, because it's the one where there's no net gain. And then the highest level is a settlement boundary adjustment where you're not swapping, you're talking about a net increase. And that gets into a whole series of new studies and new levels of examination. Because in essence, what you would have to do is you'd have to show that the land supply that you have is not enough based on your growth.
Frank, and then Councillor Morris.
Can just say a year and a half from now, the township has a huge influx of new builds. Are they able to at that time drive the next step, I guess, for more residential? Or I know that takes some time, but like when is it that they look at this and say, you know, in 5 years we're not going to have anything left, or, you know?
So maybe I can start and then Ken can pick it up. So I think one of the things that we've done in this official plan update is indicated the importance of monitoring the building permit level, monitoring the applications for residential development and for employment development, just to keep an eye on it, where it is with the supply versus the demand that's going on. You know, just as the economy is cyclical, so too the development process, and development investment generally follows the cyclical nature of the economy. We've been on a very long sustained growth trajectory, and the pandemic has changed that growth trajectory as well. Across Ontario, communities are seeing growth where they necessarily hadn't seen it at the levels previously that they experienced. The City of Toronto last year lost 50,000 people to other parts of this province. So that gives you an indication that there's something going on with people relocating outside the GTA. So the monitoring becomes really, really important. The other piece of it is really getting into the, making sure that the information is going to the county, and the information is coming from the county about what's happening with growth and subdivision development and things like that. Because the last thing you really want to, the last circumstance you want to be in is running out of land and you've got, you know, a 2 or 3 year process in front of you to address the settlement boundaries. You do not want to be in that circumstance, because then you're just going to be playing catch up all the time.
Frank?
Well, I think that's the issue that I see with some of the residential zoning now. It may be in areas that are very difficult to develop. And if costs on a developer side, if costs are way too much, there's no point of doing the project, right? So, I mean, I think the lands, the low-hanging fruit lands, I know that's a tough term to use with development, but I think that needs to be looked at from the township in Lambton County. Where I see some residential now, I mean, like, I'm not sure if any of that is easily developable, but I think there's some costs in there that would turn some developers away. And I know that there is some land available now that people are walking away from because of that, right? So my parcel of land probably will need the second phase sooner than we'll actually have access to that land. So these are my concerns, and have been my concerns since day one when I started the project. So I just want to ensure that, and I know the township's fully on board, but I want to ensure that, you know, going forward for the next couple phases, that we have flow into the next one, into the next one, into the next one, so where there is no lag. I mean, I tell you right now, like Scenic Court, you know, when we started that one, we could have easily done 35 to 40 houses if we had them. So, I mean, there's a whole year right now of no builds happening in Watford because there's just no ready to go lands, right? So anyway.
Certainly a concern that we want to address sooner rather than later. Councillor Morris, did you have a comment?
Yes, I have a question for Ken. Ken, does the city of Sarnia follow the Lambton County official plan?
Through your worship, yes, they do.
Uh,
They fall under our plan.
Okay, because they seem to be able to gobble up land for residential wherever they seem fit.
I wasn't around when the last plan was done, but I know that that when you compare their urban growth, their growth boundary in terms of what is delineated in our plan versus what they've actually developed, there is still a significant amount of land there. Keep in mind, they have to have 25 years, and that was the work that was done when we went through the process. So based on the analysis of the time, they do have that amount of land.
Okay. Thank you.
I'd also add, though, that their growth is a little bit, it's going to be a little bit different than Warwick's, because you're talking about a more urban area. So they have an ability to accommodate population growth through redevelopment opportunities as well. So you're seeing that already. You know, there's the new building that's going up down on the waterfront, for instance. There have been quite a few official plan amendments to change designations within their existing urban area to build up versus out. So I would be fairly surprised that their official plan process would suddenly warrant a huge change, because I think they have the ability to do a lot of redevelopment to achieve population growth, and they're certainly recognizing that.
Okay. Just a question, does our plan limit the height of buildings that can be built within the residential areas? And if it does, what is the limit?
It does not have a number. We didn't put a number in the plan. There are policies in the plan that talk about compatibility and low density, being surrounded by low density, and where medium density housing would occur, which would be more on arterial and collector roads, but there are no numbers on height.
Okay, so if a developer wanted to come in and put up a 4-story apartment complex, that would be permissible within the current plan?
It would be more regulated by zoning.
Okay. Great. Any other questions? Well, I appreciate everybody's comments tonight. We are going to conclude the public meeting on the Township of Warwick official plan update, and members of the public are welcome to submit further comments on the proposed official plan update to officialplan@warwicktownship.ca. And you're welcome to continue watching on our YouTube channel. We are very exciting here at Warwick Township. So we are going to move on to the other business of the evening. And that is the discussion on the potential land swap residential areas. So council, you've got that. Mary Lou, how does this work? Like, how do we?
So we do have a second presentation, so I'll get Ria to put that up and walk you through some of the thinking about that, and then just Q&A. So we can go to the next slide, please. So this is the village of Watford, and just wanted to put this up to share with you. And so we have the same context of the boundaries. So just reminding you that the purple hatched line is the boundary of the settlement area, and that was set by Lambton County. And the more intense colors of yellow and fuchsia and red, and the pinker color, those are the different land use designations within the Watford settlement area. So the areas that Mr. Capillari just spoke about are in the southeast, the yellow area in the southeast, and then up where it says Watford, just above to the north of that yellow residential area on Confederation Line, that is the area also that he was speaking about. So the swap area. But first, want to give you just some perspective on the work that Lambton County did to assess the land supply so it's in Warwick, so it's Watford plus. So it's the entire township. So maybe we can go to the next slide, please. So in 2017, the county did an analysis for every municipality in Lambton County about supply. And for the township, the forecasted number of housing units in Warwick was 671. And that includes, at the time, vacant land in Watford, in Warwick Village, as well as in the agricultural areas. And then there was a forecast done of number of housing units per year, which is the demand, and it was 10 annually. And that was based on historic building permit information. Now, recognize this was 2017, so they look somewhat backward. So they came up with a supply of 67 years, which seems really high. But there's some caveats to that. So we'll go to the next slide, which is actually back to the plan for Watford. So I just want to give you some context on calculating land supply. And let me say that it is imperfect. But it is a tool that we use to assess supply. So what the county did in 2017 was they looked at what the supply would be for each community and what the demand was, as I said. Typically, you then do a couple of things. You look at the natural heritage features, and any features such as a railway line or a provincial highway or a hydro corridor that is going to take land out of the development areas. So you can see in Watford, there are some blue lines. Those are creeks, and those creeks would not be developable, and there would be buffer areas around them. And that land would be taken out of the overall supply, and it would lower the supply. And then you would again look at demand, and you would recalculate the overall years of supply. What this method doesn't do is a few things. And Mr. Capillari kind of spoke to it earlier. First, if there are landowners who do not want to develop, have no interest in developing their property, and are just going to hold it for the long term, then that still counts in your supply, even though council may know or the community may know it's just not going to develop. When I worked for the city of Hamilton, there was an industrial business park that we had, and there was a farm smack in the middle of it. And the landowner said, we don't want to be part of the industrial business park. We have no interest in developing. Our family has been here since King George III granted us the land, and that's the way it's going to stay. And to this day, it has not developed. And that's just some of the circumstances we see. Excuse me. The other thing that doesn't factor into supply, but is also equally important, when you build a residential subdivision, it's typically about 65% of the land that ends up being housing. And that 35% covers things like stormwater ponds, roads, parks, any infrastructure you need for sewer or water, or road infrastructure. And so the supply method that we use in Ontario really doesn't get at the fact that, a third of the land is going to be something other than housing. And so when you calculate the years of supply, it's really important to understand that it is a high estimate, and there's other things that you need to take into consideration. And some of those are the judgment factors that I just talked about. The other thing about the county's work that was done in 2017 is it included potential housing units outside the settlement area. It's not wrong to do that. Let me be very clear. There's a lot of communities that do that, and it's not a wrong method. But it really doesn't get at addressing where people want to live. And because those rural lots really service such a small percentage of the population, that in some instances, you could just discount them completely. We don't have the information that tells us how many of those rural or agricultural lots were included in 2017. I don't imagine it was many, but it's just a caution that in looking at supply, you need to discount it a little bit because of those rural lands. We can go to the next slide, please. So when we look at planning for growth, and we talked about this a week ago when we talked about the population figures and the fact that you've exceeded the 2031 population figures already. So you can see that there are things going on. That is absolutely one clue. You can also see the uptick in 2019 and 2020 of building permits. And when you couple that with the amount of vacant land that you saw in the previous slide, you can see that there may be a situation where people are not bringing their lands forward for development. We know from the information that Phil provided to us that there's 59 lots that are in active subdivisions, and there's interest in well over another 100 lots. So you can see that there is demand. What we know when we look at the active subdivisions as well as the inquiries that your planning staff are getting, that's an indicator of developer confidence in the community and the housing market in the community. So even though those lots haven't and those applications may not have come forward, there is interest that is telling us that the developers are seeing that there is market attraction within Warwick and specifically Watford. We can go to the next slide, please. Oh, this might be it. All right. So maybe we can go back to the map, Ria, please. So when we spoke about the potential land swap we talked about the area in the southeast that's yellow and looking at a potential swap into the northwest in the agricultural land. And just a couple of comments on that southeast land. You can see that it's surrounded by industrial and mixed industrial commercial. It's somewhat isolated from the rest of the neighborhood. It doesn't mean it couldn't be a great neighborhood on its own. Absolutely not. But you can see why it would be more difficult to develop because of what's going to happen around it in the long term and the railroad tracks as well. We understand from your staff as well as Mr. Capillari, there's interest in the Northwest lands. And so if you were going to look at a swap, it would be identifying lands that you're prepared to give up and they have to come out of the settlement area. So that purple line would change in an area in order to expand the purple line in another area. And it is a net for net. So it's a zero-sum game in the end. I think those are all my comments. So maybe we can take the presentation down and have a conversation and answer some questions. Thank you.
Okay, Council, do you have any questions or comments on that presentation? Councillor Morris.
Yeah, Meredith, I'm a little confused, I guess, a little bit. The land that was purple was industrial. Does the official plan have anything to do with zoning?
Your zoning bylaw has to comply to the official plan.
So the land that we have zoned industrial, can it be changed to industrial commercial? Or
Yes.
do we have to have an official plan amendment for that?
You could do it as part of this official plan update if you wanted to change it to industrial commercial.
Okay.
Question?
Pardon me?
That's a good question.
And let's say we took that residential section that we would think we're considering to swap. Once we move it, what does that land become?
It would become agriculture.
But it's landlocked. Because the front of it is commercial.
So as the commercial lands develop, there would need to be a road connection put to it. And that would be something that would be done through this plan of subdivision.
Okay.
If I may,
There
it's
is a
actually
right
not-
of way.
Yeah,
There is
it's
a right
not
of way
landlocked yet.
to that parcel at the back.
Okay.
Just a note, yeah.
Currently, they're both being used as agriculture, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
We actually lease them out in partnership with Waste Management for farm lease.
Okay. Do we have a map of kind of the proposed changes at all?
Maybe we can get Rhea to put the map back up. I can describe it to you what's been communicated to us, and it is that northwest land. And if you have an image of it in your mind, it is in the area that's shown where the Watford is and exactly where Rhea's mouse hand is. So north of the purple line to the creek, and the west boundary would be the creek as well.
Is there any, that's obviously not the same size as what is there in the, on the other side? Like where would we, would you do kind of like the whole, because you want it to balance, right? Like you don't want to just take a piece out of that residential, you want to move the whole section.
Yeah, and I think that that goes to the point that Ken made is you really don't want to fritter it around because you
Yeah,
have to do
that's
multiple
thinking.
studies and you're not really getting a community with a number of houses and potentially a park and things like that. So if it is that entire yellow area, we would work with the county to calculate the acreage. And then if the northwest is the area, and it seems the logical area, to be honest, then we would calculate an area and give you some shape sizes to look at.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and
I
say,
think all
it
of
may
that,
not, sorry, Marilyn, but I was just going to jump in and say it may
Oh,
not
please.
necessarily be the exact size of that square. I think what we would want to do is look at what is the area. Well, I'll back up. The first question I think that this council needs to think about is, do you want to engage the county to begin a process which may have to be separate than your official plan update to adjust this boundary, or do you want to leave it to a private application? Then secondly, notwithstanding that question, what's the amount of area just around the word Watford that would be where any readjustment would occur, either at a county initiated or privately initiated application? Because then you can figure out what change to the yellow square in the southeast would be, because it might be that you end up leaving some of that yellow because you don't get the exact numbers. Like, it doesn't have to be that entire yellow square suddenly switches back to agriculture. It could be that based on an analysis, it's only a portion of that moves. So it might be that some of it stays down there. Who knows? Like that, I think that's the calculation that Mary Lou is saying would have to happen down the road. I hope that makes sense. If not, then just ignore it.
Can I
Phil?
chime in? I did a quick, I was paying attention, but I was working on the mapping system. Quick estimates, that block in the southeast is approximately 55 acres. The area up where the fort is in Watford, it's approximately 30. So gives us, if we're moving 55 in the southeast, we only take up 30 in the northwest.
Yeah, so there's some wiggle room to leave some down there, or it could be that maybe we spread it around up in that area if there's a feeling that would be appropriate. I would love your comments on this, Mary Lou, because, as Mary Lou pointed out earlier, we have the benefit of the fact the only person who has ever done a swap is on our team. So.
Yeah, so thanks, Ken. So I think that just to pick up on what Ken said, this gives you some choices, and thanks, Phil, for the calculations. So if you're thinking and supporting that 30 acres comes out of the southeast and goes up into that northwest area that we talked about, we can look at leaving the 20-ish acres in the southeast. We can also look at some options in other lands in the northwest, either along Confederation line. What you really want to do with that 20 acres, though, is you want to make sure you're building a really, really good neighborhood. And if 20 acres in the southeast is going to do that around that industrial and mixed industrial commercial, and I'm not sure it is, then leave it there. But if we think that there's an option, either, I would say probably going west along Confederation line and just creating a really great neighborhood and options for housing along Confederation line. So we'd probably look at options going a little bit further west on the north side of Confederation line.
I can't see, if we were to move a portion of that, anybody wanting to develop a residential area in, say, like the 15 acres that would be left over. I think would be more beneficial to move it along Confederation line, but that's just my opinion. Maybe council has different thoughts on that. Councillor Westgate?
It's too hard to service that to get a sewer line into that area anyway. We want to move the whole thing out of there. Yeah. And I would take as much of that one farm as we can, or like Mary Lou says, run it along Confed line there and make residential out a little farther.
Yeah, I agree.
But we'd have to talk to, who is that, Joe Rumbouts?
Yes.
Yes.
And see what he would want to do there.
Yep. Councillor Morris.
What about instead of moving it west on Confed, moving it east on Confed, in the front off of Confed where the industrial zone is? Did we not have some conversations about residential along there?
That's a good comment. That's along where the dog park is, and That's not a bad idea. Can we do that without having a number of different studies? Can we like have a section like where we move part of it along there?
That would, so if it's two areas, sort of east and west on Confederation line, that would be two studies. And
Okay.
then we'd also need to deal with the employment areas that are around it and making sure that there's a good separation. So we're building quality residential neighborhoods. And I will say that I think that going east along Confederation line, it would become, on the north side of Confederation line, it would become an isolated residential community somewhat.
Councillor Westgate.
And that is an area we need for industrial or commercial. Like it's a good commercial area along the highway there.
Should
Yes.
we change that to mixed commercial industrial now during the official plan? Right now, looks to me like it's all industrial.
It is industrial, north of Confederation line. The sort of very bright fuchsia is industrial. You could make changes, absolutely. It would need to be industrial or mixed industrial commercial or commercial.
Yeah, but
Do you need a motion?
I would rather have the option of mixed commercial industrial than straight industrial.
Yes,
That's
I
just my
agree.
opinion.
It would be nice if somebody wanted to put a restaurant along Confederation line or along Nauvoo Road there, that they
Well, I'm
have
just
that option,
thinking,
or a retail place.
home hardware, is it not commercial?
It is, yeah.
But it's zoned all around it industrial.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the same with Napa, and that's commercial.
I think we should change that. I don't think it should be industrial.
So what is the process in having that changed, Mary Lou?
So what we'll do is we'll note it in feedback from council, and when we release our responses in May. I do want to take a little bit closer look at it. Want to make sure you do have a healthy industrial supply, and we can get you a response on that. So in June, I think, is when you would need to make a decision on that.
Okay. In regards, can we go circle back to the residential lands? Is it possible for us to get kind of a visual of what the proposed changes? I think everybody's kind of on the same page here. I believe council wants to do whatever is going to be quickest as far as getting those lands changed, so that when we do have developers wanting to develop, they can do that. But I don't want to speak for all of council. Councilor Westgate?
It would be quicker if we took the lead on it and did it, would it not?
Yeah.
I think, so if I can perhaps give you some suggestions. I think we've heard from council members tonight that those lands in the southeast that are shown as residential, like you just don't see them developing as residential, and you're comfortable with them reverting to agriculture. What we can do is look at some options in the northwest. I think carrying the 30 acres northward to the creek, that certainly makes a lot of sense. And then look at some shaping options along Confederation line, and we can get that back for you in June. In the meantime, I think for the next little while, we're going to work on what the process would look like, so we can give you a process update and timing update, and we should be able to get that to you in May.
Okay, I think the sooner the better. The sooner we can get it to the county to be looking at, the better. Like even if we had to have a special council meeting or something to speed that along would be great. And in the meantime, I don't know, should we be talking to the person who owns the land to the west of where we're proposing, to see if they would be interested in the possibility of that becoming a residential kind of zoned area?
I think that that's probably a good idea. Yes.
Okay.
I'll just chime in very quickly, Mayor Rombouts, in terms of process. So generally, so oddly enough, there's only been one swap done in Ontario, and there have been exactly 0 amendments done to the county official plan. And that's not just the current one, but the last one. So we've never actually had a county official plan amendment process happen beyond rewriting the plan or doing the updates that we've had to do. That said, so I think there's going to be some conversations we'll be having in-house in terms of what studies would need to be scoped, because keep in mind, while we may be all on the same page about doing an adjustment, there is process that has to happen and there's studies that need to be done. So we need to scope what those studies are and then figure out how that information is going to be obtained and whose responsibility it is to do what, because the county can't accept an application until it's received all the information it needs to do the work. The most logical way to put it is the township is technically an applicant, so we would treat you no different than a developer. So if you submit an incomplete application, it's going to be deemed incomplete and it's not going to go anywhere. So I think what we want to do is try to get you off to a good start. So my suggestions would be that certainly conversations with that landowner should begin. I think Mary Lou has said that the team knows what it needs to do to go back and look at the geometry of shapes and things and come up with some options, and certainly we'll be doing an in-house team just debriefing once all of these meetings are done specifically about this. Then we'll need to scope out studies, and I think what I'd like to do is in June, once we figured out what those options are and get a sense of whether that landowner is interested or not, we would come back to you with some potential options and then kind of spell out, here is the process, because I think it's fair to say, and Mary Lou, jump in if I'm off base, I think this process is going to have to happen sort of alongside of, but not necessarily in step with your official plan update. It will be something that will go past the update process.
That's correct, because it is a county official plan amendment first, and then you would very quickly pass an amendment to your official plan.
Yeah, and I'll just add, we need to be very careful when we're opening up the county official plan, because we don't want to, we want to be very specific in our scope of any changes, so that folks don't think that we're all of a sudden reopening the entire settlement area conversation for every local municipality. That this is a very specific scope of review for change. And I think it would be prudent for us to kind of have a bit of a conversation with our provincial colleagues to let them know what's coming, because they will certainly be surprised when they see a county plan amendment, because they've never seen one other than what we've done for our review. So
in terms of that, Ken, would it be wise for us to try to schedule a meeting with, I don't know who it would be. Would it be the Ministry of Municipal Affairs, or what division of the provincial government would we talk to, and should we be looking at trying to get a delegation at AMO? Just to give them a heads up on what we're thinking and why.
That's a great question. We've already been in contact with our colleagues in municipal affairs in London. They're, as Mary Lou mentioned, they're part of the circulation process. So, and we had some conversations with them about this whole question of the 25 years versus 20 years and whatnot. So I think if you leave it with us, we'll get in touch with them, kind of give them an update as to where we're at. I think they're owed a bit of an update anyway, and kind of where we're going from that. And I think Mary Lou and I can kind of spearhead that and deal with that.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
And just if I could, Mayor Rombouts, the reason Ontario has the swap provisions is it's a localized solution to managing growth that doesn't open up the whole issue of where should growth be in the county. And so it gives the township and township council the ability to really focus on their own destiny without being caught up in everybody else's concerns around growth. And that's a really, really important option for municipalities in Ontario.
Yeah, I think it just makes sense for us. Like it's pretty easy to explain this, that, you know, our lagoon system is kind of over to that side of Watford. It would be much easier to service and all of that. And it just makes sense to do that move. In the future, would we have been better to do this during the official plan conversation before it was approved, Ken? I'm just wondering for down the road.
I would say that would be where the conversation should have occurred. But then when you look back on the fact that it was 2010, the likelihood that anybody even had it on the radar is probably nil.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, there was really very little to predict that this was going to be an issue. So we'll just do the best we can with what we have. We're definitely, so in order to get to the point where we've used up all of our residential, like at what happens then? If it's before the county begins the process of their next official plan?
So what happens in that? So the county will need to do some updates because of the 2020 provincial policy statement and because of the population issues. We highlighted them for Warwick last week. Plimpton, Wyoming is in the same circumstance, and Point Edward is going to be there very quickly as well, where you've exceeded the 2031 population forecast. So there's some work to do there. And because we're now looking 25 years forward, every time you do an update of the county official plan or the township official plan, you want to do that check to make sure that you do have sufficient land for the 25 years that you're planning for. The other thing I think it's really, really important to do, particularly for Warwick, but also for Plimpton, Wyoming as well, is you need to be really aware of the vacant residential land and, you know, can it be serviced? Is there a willing landowner there? And if the landowner isn't willing, I mean, that's okay. The land may sell in 10 years or 15 years. But if you think that the supply that you have is just not going to develop and you're going to get into a constrained situation, then when the county is doing their updates or you're doing your updates, that's when it's the time to take a really hard look at these issues. And that's exactly what you're doing right now and saying, you know, those lands in the southeast, like, they're just not in the best location for a residential neighborhood. They've got servicing challenges as well. So let's take a fresh look. And I think that that's the right thing to do. I will always stress the importance of those monitoring reports. We've put monitoring policies in the official plan update once a year. You should be taking a look at what did we do in the last year? How many applications do we have? Is there land that really isn't going to develop that we're going to have to take a look at? Because then you won't get into those circumstances where you're thinking, we're just going to run out of land. Then what happens?
Councillor Westgate.
That area that we're talking about moving, that was put there because we own the land, and there was no place else that we knew somebody was ready to turn it into residential. If we fill in all the land we have, residential land we have now, we've got bigger problems. We have to redo the lagoon system again. Our water supply will be really pushing it if there's enough. So there's a lot of changes to be made before we need more residential land.
That's a very good point. Councillor Westgate, very good point. Now that's another issue. Like if we didn't own that land that's deemed residential, it would be almost impossible to rezone it if somebody else owned it, because they could argue that you're changing the zoning if they wanted to keep it as a residential for whatever reason, correct?
It's still council's decision to make. So you could proceed even if a landowner disagreed with you, they may try and appeal your decision, but ultimately it is council's decision to make. Look, in the land swap that I did in West Lincoln, we took a 100-acre farm out of a hamlet and we added 100 acres to the Smithville urban area. Smithville is very similar to Watford in community size, maybe a bit bigger. But there was just such housing demand in Smithville, and having that 100 acres in a small hamlet that was going to develop probably never, it just didn't make any sense any longer. It wasn't the same circumstance, but very similar. That 100 acres was privately owned and the landowner had no concerns. They were never planning to develop.
So there's land that's deemed residential right now in the plan to the west of the town settlement. And it hasn't been developed at this point, but it is zoned residential. If those owners said, like, we're never going to develop this as residential, then it would make sense to move that. I'm not saying that that's the case, but.
Yeah, and those are the types of things you want to keep an eye on, and make sure you're connecting with those landowners just to understand what their intentions are. And if they're just never planning to develop, or they're never planning to sell, they want to keep the land in their family, then those are circumstances where you say, you know what, at a certain point, we're going to be in trouble. So we need to be thinking about where growth should occur and making sure we have a servicing plan for it. And those are things that are done typically through an official plan review. You don't have to do it in an official plan review, but they are things that you really do need to pay attention to.
Now, part of the map is the open spaces in the light green there. At what point, like, if there were to be a large residential development where we're proposing to put it, if council wanted to see, say, a park put in there, would that have to be designated now, or would it be part of the site plan, or how does that work? Like, because, you know what I'm saying? Because it would be beneficial to that side of the community to have a nice park put up.
Yeah, so that's something that we can look at as part of the policies if there's if the land swap does proceed, and updating the township's official plan that part of your expectation is that there will be a park in that, either the northwest or just in the western end of town. You can see on this map it's going to be needed, and you don't want people driving to the park, which some people would do. So you want to be able to provide it in the community. And then there's it would be implemented through the plan of subdivision. But we would start with, in that swap amendment, saying, look, there needs to be a plan for a complete community, includes a park that's going to have to be part of what's built in this area.
Okay, great. Any other questions from staff or from council today? Do we have a pretty clear vision of where we're going with this? That's my priority, is to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that we know next steps. Councillor Morris?
I think we kind of said that we're going to take the residential out of the southeast. It's a matter of where we're all going to put it. I think we need to discuss later.
Okay. And who is responsible for talking to the landowners to the northwest side there?
I think we can, my suggestion, Mayor Rambout-Thurier, is that we could take that offline and talk with council at a future meeting about strategy for that process.
Okay, thank you. I want to make sure that we all kind of have our roles and know what the next steps are so that we can keep proceeding. Is there any other questions or comments for Mary Lou or for Ken?
I'll just add, I think from our team's perspective, we we kind of have our own direction from you in terms of what to investigate and to bring back to you. And then I think what we would expect from council once we brought back the options, and Mary Lou, jump in if I miss anything, would be from council a decision on how you want to proceed, whether council wants to begin that discussion with the county, or whether you want to just say, well, you know what, we'll leave it to a private landowner. I think it's better to bring back some options for you, and then you make that call at the next step so that you see exactly what needs to happen. You've heard that there will be studies that need to be done and what have you. So I think there's some further work that we need to do in order for you to then make an informed decision.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Thank you guys so much for, I know, Ken, you're very busy and kind of between different meetings. We really appreciate you taking the time tonight to be a part of this.
I literally left your committee of adjustment to join Mary Lou in the Plimpton open house last night.
Well, we appreciate it. We really do. This is a big priority for our council, so we really appreciate the partnership that we're seeing with the county.
I will just say, if I could, I really wish we were in person so that we could actually get the map out and the crayons and start drawing. That's where planners really have fun. So I do miss that, but.
Yes, we all miss that. We are all looking forward to being able to meet again in person and get those crayons out. Would be fantastic. Unfortunately, we're not at that point yet, so we're doing the best we can with what we have. We will move on to bylaws. I'm going to let Amanda read those.
Mayor Ronda, thank you. The resolution today is just for the confirming bylaw, that bylaw number 41 of 2021 be read a first, second, and third time and finally passed.
And that's moved by Councillor Morris, seconded by Councillor Mitchell. All in favor? That is carried, and we just need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Westgate, seconded by Councillor Morris. All in favor? Thank you again to everyone who joined us tonight, and we look forward to continuing with this process.